Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Lunch and Learn. Do we have our friends from Poland joining us today? Rafal, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning.
Perfect. Then I will introduce our speaker for today. No less than my idol, Ann Ek.
Thank you for that humble introduction. No pressure. Okay, really nice to be here again, talking about cultural differences. And since we made a special invite to our colleagues in Poland, we will do this in English. And hopefully I will find all the words. And if someone of you do not understand the words, you just have to say, hey, let's translate it so we can help each other. So the topic is cross-cultural collaboration and communication with the subtitle Diversity Makes Us Better. And as you know, there is a lot of research and studies that show that diversity is the foundation for innovation, creativity, and efficiency. But there is also a lot of research that show that initially, when we're new in a collaboration or new into a teamwork, diversity can make it more difficult. And even more so when we have different cultural backgrounds, because our brains are programmed to see differences as something that could actually be dangerous. But the positive side of this is that we, with rather small changes in our own behavior and a dose of self-awareness, we can actually handle these difficulties. And I also, when I talk about differences and communication, I always like to link to our business and digitalization. And that's really important when we, for example, build artificial and machine intelligence and how we build the systems. And perhaps some of you have heard that initially when Siri in our phones were built, Siri couldn't recognize women voices. And face recognition did not work for Black people. And the first recruitment robots, they were designed to fit and only recruit middle-aged white men, because there was a bias built into the system because all the data came from recruiting to top positions, often middle-aged white men. So lots of things to be aware of. Approximately 20 years ago, I lived in South Africa. I lived there and I worked for 3 years, starting up a consultancy company. And I went to lots and lots of sales meetings. And in the beginning, when I went to sales meetings, you know, I took the car downtown, and there were these big office buildings where you had to go into the elevator and go up to the meeting. And in the beginning, there always became like a traffic jam in front of the elevator. Because going into this office building, there were almost always men going into these business meetings, and me. And all the men in South Africa, they were kind of polite, so they were waiting for me to go into the elevator first. And it took me a couple of meetings and some time to realize that even if I came in the last, I had to go into the elevator first, and then we could go up to the meeting. And then in the meeting, it was a really interesting experience as well, because often I went to these meetings together with a colleague who was a man. And very often I was the one doing the pitch. And then the client, the potential client, had questions. And the potential client always turned to the man, my colleague, asking the questions. And my colleague looked at me and I gave the answer. So a different kind of world, different cultures, different experiences. But I've also traveled around the world doing a lot of training and workshops. And one thing, even if we're different, one thing that I realized is that we're more similar than we think. And for example, my experience is that we laugh at the same jokes. So somewhere we're just human. And I think that is what we have to have in mind. I will do a lot of generalizing now when I talk about cultural differences. So you have to be aware of that. But what about culture then? So let me click. Well, culture we can describe like this or in other ways, but it's the way we do things here. How we see our values, our ideas, our beliefs, and how we share that as a group. And that is important. And that's why I want us to have this workshop, because we have to recognize cultural differences and we have to be aware of some possible gaps. But when we do the generalizing, we also have to acknowledge that all people are different. Just because we're Swedes or Polish, we're still very different. And I want you during this time to start a process where you reflect about your own culture. And in the end, I think it's all about curiosity, and that we have to create an openness and readiness to better adapt to new situations and new ways of working. That's what it's all about. And I like this picture. The two stupid chickens, one of them saying, "How do I get to the other side?" And the other one saying, "You are on the other side." So we see things from different perspectives. And to provoke you even more, I like to show this picture. We see others through our own glasses. And if you should have one learning from this presentation, I think it's this, that it starts with ourselves. We see others through our own glasses, and we mirror other people's actions through our own experience. This is a kind of a provocative picture, but it's very interesting. Who sets the rules? And this is very much connected to the culture that we are born and raised in and where we actually live. But what about culture then? Often when you talk about culture, you can use the iceberg analogy. What makes us different? Some things we can actually see. They are above the sea level. And some things we don't see. They are more difficult to see, they're more difficult to understand, and they are below. The biggest part, as in an iceberg, is below the surface. And if we would have been in the same room doing this workshop, I would have probably asked you lots of questions about what can you actually have above the surface and what do you have below. But I will help you with the answer instead. What we can see above the surface, of course, when we talk about culture, it's the language, it's how we dress. We have a lot of customs and the food we eat, the behaviors that we actually show. That's what you can see when you collaborate with people. But then we have more diffuse aspects below the surface. Our basic values and beliefs, how we prioritize in life, and leadership and hierarchy. We're going to look into a bit of that here. Communication. And sometimes you can say that we have the behavior above the surface, and then below the surface, you can say that you have the cognitive aspects, the way we're equipped, the way we learn, our abilities, and our competences. And then we also have below surface the emotional, how we actually react to different situations. So it's very complex. And again, even if we're supposed to be from the same culture, of course, we are very different here. It's from an individual and personal perspective. But when we are in the topic of generalizing, I'm not sure if you've seen this. This is a very common way of describing. It's a world culture map, and it's made by the World Values Survey. It's a global research project that explores people's values and beliefs and how they change over time and what kind of social and political impact they have. And since 1981, a worldwide network of social scientists, they have conducted these national surveys to build this graph. And it measures and monitors a lot of different perspectives, looking at democracy, tolerance for minorities, role of religion, the impact of globalization, and how we see work and how we see family and politics, lots and lots of different things, and also well-being. And this version is updated in 2020. How you should read the graph is that on the on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you have self-expression values. How much you sort of spend on yourself to your own individual development. And then on the y-axis, we have how traditional you are, and moving up, the more secularized you are, how much you sort of focus on religious values and religious rules. So if you look at all the countries that you can see here in the graph, you have down to the left, you have a lot of respect for authorities, strong focus on religion and tradition. And then moving to the right, you have a more individualistic and self-expression values and cultures. Moving up, more free from religious rules. So if we look at this, we find Sweden in the top right corner. So very self-expression, very individualistic culture, and very sort of non-traditional, not focusing on religion and the traditional values in the same way. As for example, we can find Poland, very much in the middle, in the green part. So much less individualistic culture, generalizing, and more traditional, connected to the religious values. So it's really interesting to see all the countries here and see where we come from. And also interesting if you want to dig deeper into this to see changes, looking at old cultural maps, how certain countries actually move and develop over time. And then we have to start to reflect upon ourselves. Most of us listening in here, we're Swedish. Are we so normal? In this graph, we're kind of extreme, actually. I met an American speaker talking about cultural differences a couple of years ago. He moved to Sweden. And one thing he was really confused about was that when Swedes meet each other on the street or sit next to someone at a bus, someone we don't know, we normally don't say hi to people. But when we're out walking in the forest, then he reflected upon that we actually say hi to everyone we meet. And he thought that was a really, really strange rule. So what about the Nordics then? We have many of the Nordic countries up in the right corner, but still we are kind of different as well within the Nordic countries. And now I want to show you a film. I have clicked on share with sound, so let's hope it works.
Cracking the Nordic code. That's
I hope you heard and saw the film, except for Stefano. Sorry about that. The point with that film is that many non-Nordic people often think that people from the Nordic are all the same, but we're not. I've worked a lot in different Nordic countries, and I really recognize this, that you make this decision and you have the Danish people there and they say, yes, let's do that. And then they go home and do whatever they want. And that's really frustrating for a Swede who wants things to be in order. Another very interesting aspect is talking about leadership is this question: should the leader have the answer? And what do you think? What countries do you think we have in the top or the bottom? And I will challenge you to write in the chat, where do you think we find Sweden? Anyone who have a guess? Where do you think we can find Sweden? No guessing. Opening the chat. Quite at the bottom, Stefano says. Malin Stengberg, 73%. I see some more of you are writing. 27%. Thank you, Matthias. 23, Sofia. This is really interesting. And actually in this graph, I did not find Poland, but still, let's bring it on. This is the way it looks. Sweden, in general, we don't think the leader should have all the answers. But in India, China, Brazil, especially India and China, yes, the leader should have all the answers. So just bringing a team together, working with your own leadership, being a Swede, being a leader for Indian team, very, very different. And I would actually guess, based on other slides that I will show you, that we have Poland somewhere around 70%. I would guess that we actually have, and you can challenge me if you don't agree. I can show you this one as well. This picture is stolen from a book, as you can see. It's from a professor at INSEAD, Paris University, on cultural differences. And here you can think of leadership as being very hierarchical or leadership being very egalitarian. And if you are in the egalitarian leadership style, well, you think that you don't have to bother the boss if you have any questions. Of course, you want to work with your first name. And you also think that it's okay to disagree with your leader in public. If you're in a meeting and I don't agree with my boss, I can say so in front of everyone. How we sit in the room is not important. The speaking order is not important. We can all raise our hand and have a view in the meeting. And you can also see that in these cultures, the whole team is often very involved in the strategy of the company. And communication does not have to go via the hierarchical lines. But on the other hand, in the hierarchical business, of course, communication should follow the hierarchical steps. Sometimes you don't want to cooperate without having a clearance from your supervisor. It's okay if I go and cooperate with the other people. If you're emailing, you often want to put your boss on a CC. And sometimes you experience that the boss do not share all the information, and status is much more important. Of course, this is not the exact truth. And again, it's different because we have different company cultures, but it's still very important to be aware of that we expect different behaviors and we view things in very different ways. And actually, this Saturday, I was at a party and I met a woman. She works as a leader in, she's in clothing retail, in a clothing company. And she is very senior and experienced, and she travels a lot. She travels a lot to Asia. And what she described is that she believes that she is often much better treated in Asia, being a female leader, because when she is in Asia, she gets everyone to listen to her. She is often the very competent person. She comes there with a lot of knowledge, and when she's in a meeting, she believes that everyone is listening to her. But she describes that when she is in Sweden, in the same kind of meeting with the same kind of people, she has to struggle to get her voice heard. And I mean, this is a paradox, because her experience is like that because she's in a hierarchical country, and then her hierarchy is more important. But in Sweden, she is a minority, being a woman, and hierarchy is not important in Sweden. So what you can see is that there are backs and there are good things and bad things about the hierarchy in this, and makes things easier and not so easy. Really difficult and really complex to think about. But it was a very interesting experience for me to start to reflect upon. I talked a bit about, we saw that Indian was in the top and Sweden was in the bottom when it comes to should the leader have all the experience. And often when we work in IT development, we have a lot of Indian colleagues. And I built this next slide, when I worked in Scandic, because we had an IT department and we had outsourced a lot of our development to India. So that's why we really wanted to make that comparison. And this was a very basic example that we started to create awareness with, that the European style and the Swedish style is more direct, but the Indian style is more indirect. And sometimes it feels like a joke when you're reading this slide, but in Sweden, yes means yes, and no means no. And if we're not saying no in Sweden, we interpret it as yes. But many Indian people, and in the Indian culture, I've been told, yes may mean yes, or it can also mean I hear you. And if you hear yes, but, it could mean like, we'll try, I see, but in the end, it likely means no. And Indian colleagues, they seldom say the word no. And if they don't say anything, it means no. So just the thing of silence, when you don't get a clear answer, in Sweden, we assume it's yes, but in India, we assume it's no. So again, it's really, really important with a clear communication, that we're actually saying what do we mean, and that we can actually repeat, this is the decision, this is what we said, do we all agree? So making it really difficult to cooperate. Another way when we talk about this is to discuss feedback. We say that we want to have this feedback culture, and how do we actually give feedback? Well, we can give feedback in very different ways. We can have direct negative feedback, or we can do it in a more indirect way. And the more direct feedback, it's more sort of honest and frank. Negative messages, they are said clear out, and they are not softened up with positive messages. And when we work with direct negative feedback, we can also sort of use these absolute words that totally inappropriate or completely unprofessional when we're criticizing. And in the direct negative feedback, we can also give feedback in front of the group. But when we do the indirect negative feedback, we sort of do it more softly. Positive messages are used to wrap up the negative messages, and we're not the same absolute way in our communication. Instead we say sort of inappropriate, or we use slightly unprofessional. So it's more messy in this way. Here are the countries from the same cultural book from the professor in NCAD. And we can see that in this graph, we don't have Sweden, but I would say that Sweden is a bit in the sort of towards the indirect because we want to soften up the messages and wrap in the sort of negative communication sometimes. But really interesting to see how the different countries vary when we're giving feedback. And I have another one connected to how we act when we don't agree with each other. So when we disagree with each other, we can have this more confrontational style, or we can have the avoiding confrontation. And then we can have a more emotionally expressive style, or we can have a more emotionally unexpressive style. And when we're looking at this matrix, we can understand that we behave in different ways. So if we're up in the left corner, we have this emotionally expressive and confrontational. Here we can really understand when a person is upset, because you can see it in the behavior and you can hear it in the language. But if we move just to the right corner, we have the emotionally expressive, but more avoiding confrontation. Here we have to look at people to see how they're actually, how they're feeling, because they might not say it in the same way. So here we have to look at people and sort of feel how they are acting, because they're not saying it. If we then move down, if we go to the bottom left corner, we have the confrontational style, but the emotionally unexpressive. Well, here people don't really show that they're upset, but you can hear it from the language, how they're actually expressing what they're saying. And if we go to the right bottom, here we find Sweden. We normally avoid confrontation, and we're also emotionally unexpressive. So it's really difficult to see if someone is upset or if they're happy, because they're sort of a plain body language and also not so expressive in their language. So when we're in a team and we have different cultures, and some people really want to confront and others don't, and some people are showing off with their whole body that they're upset, and some people are more quiet. It's easy to judge, but perhaps we misinterpret because we don't look both ways. So I think this is a really good way to reflect upon diversity. And then again, diversity is really good for us. We need this, even if we understand that it's more difficult to cooperate. And there is a lot of studies and research that show that we become more efficient, we become more profitable, we are more committed to our work, and collaboration becomes better, morale becomes better, personnel turnover will reduce when we have diversity in the team. But as we know, there are lots of studies saying that it's more difficult to cooperate. And but what studies show is that we can become twice as productive if we have people that are a bit different. But when we ask the team afterwards, how was the collaboration? They might say it was very difficult, but we can see it in the results that we actually challenge each other in a much better way. And here it's about helping our brain to understand this, that diversity is a possibility and not a threat. And as I said in the beginning, when we face something that feels a bit strange and different, it makes us feel insecure. And we have to sort of be able to handle this. And I have this graph that I think is really good illustrating that when we feel this moment of insecurity, in a millisecond, it is our choice to decide. Should we go into the curiosity track or should we go into the fear track? And this choice we sometimes make very unconscious, and as I said, in a millisecond, but is so important for what happens. If we choose the fear track, we get suspicion, we get generalizing, hostility, and discrimination. And I think this is what we see a lot in our society, that we face something that makes us feel insecure, the fear strikes, and then the sort of the bad spiral is going. We're going the fear track, ending up in, for example, discrimination. But if we can challenge ourselves into going into the curiosity track, we get these fantastic meetings. We can create understanding. We can create inclusion. And here's where development starts to happen. So when we see this, we can really understand that companies or teams or groups or countries diversity can actually become much more profitable, much more efficient, and a much better place in the end. So next time you feel this insecurity, stop yourself and decide to go the curiosity track. That's my advice to you. And this is also very much connected to growth mindset that many of you have heard me talk about. When you have the growth mindset, you're sort of open for new experiences. You see failure as an opportunity to grow, and you really want to start to learn. You see that challenges and insecurity is a way to learn. So you are open and you are a curious person. But if you're in the fixed mindset, you sort of put all your energy into your appearance of being a smart and perfect person. So you definitely do not want to fail, and you do not want to be challenged, and you do not want any negative feedback, because you are a perfect person and you're not open to learning. So most probably, if you have a fixed mindset, if you are a fixed mindset person, you will go into the fear track and you will not be open to new experiences. So I really want you to bring this into your own mindset and start to think about how you act when you meet new people and people that are very much different from you. On this theme about being curious, and it's very much how we sort of act in our teams and how we collaborate together. And one of humans' strongest needs, all of us, is to feel belonging. And if we don't feel like we belong to the team or the group, it will actually cause us physical pain. And there are studies that show this, that people that are excluded from a group, if you put sensors on that person that is excluded from the group, you can see that all the pain centers in the brain are activated. The same pain sensors that are activated if we actually hurt ourselves, as if we are excluded from a group. And minorities, they spend 25 to 30% of their energy to fit in. That's a lot of time, feeling this pain of not being included into the team. And again, then we can realize that we're not efficient in the work. We're not thinking at our best level, because we're spending so much time just wanting to belong into the group. And I have another film that I want to share with you. It's a commercial, and it's filmed as a hidden camera. And it's a commercial for beer, and I do not want to encourage you guys to drink beer at work, but still it's a really good film showing this hidden camera, how we can actually meet new people and collaborate in a really good way when we don't see our own bias. So let's hope that Stefano can see the film. I will click play now. Maybe some of you have seen it. I've seen it so many times and I still get very emotional. I think this is a fantastic film, and probably it's a fake, or if it's a real hidden camera, I don't know. But the point is, these people, they are so different, but they meet each other not knowing anything about the other person. They start to work together, they start to get to know each other in that situation, and they don't really know who the other people are, and then they get to know afterwards. But if they would have known who the other person were, if they've seen these clips of them saying stupid things, do you think they would have actually given each other a chance? Do you think they would have built this bar together? I don't think so. I think they would have left in the beginning, and they would never have given each other a chance. So I think it's a super example of how we can actually try to, when we're recruiting without bias, when we're collaborating with different cross-cultural and differences, and not just cross-cultural, other types of differences, to actually get to know each other for real, or without perhaps all the bias in the back. So my final advice for you then, this is a super difficult topic. Start to think about that people are different. And now we're talking about different countries, but even within the same country, we know we're very different. So start with yourself. Start a process where you reflect upon your own culture and your own behaviors. That's where it starts. And you have to have this curiosity mindset, and you have to be open to new kind of situations. But to help us, we need some structure. We need to talk about this, our ways of workings. How do we actually report? What deadlines should we have? How do we make decisions? How do we actually work with leadership? Because some of us think the leader should have the answer, and some of us do not think so. And also, we're miscommunicating very often. Yes means yes, or yes means no. So always summarize what we have agreed upon. And if we're not sure, we have to clarify. I also think it's a very good idea to use different kinds of communication, always in teams. Phone, email, chat, face-to-face. Vary them so that you're sure that you can actually reach out to everyone. And if you feel this fear and worries, talk about it immediately. Do not just hide it, because then it becomes much bigger than it have to be. And it's about curiosity. Respect differences, be curious, and be careful about first impression, and give people a chance. And that will help if you have a growth mindset. Easy peasy. Thank you for listening in. That was my presentation. I will stay here for a couple of minutes if someone has any questions. Otherwise, thank you for listening in, and have a good day.
Thank you, Anne.